With just 4 days to go in the season, the Pacers are making some moves and changing up their roster per Adrian Wojnarowski and Shams Charania. Two-way guys are getting their deals converted. Keifer Sykes might be on his way out of Indiana. We'll break it all down today and why the Pacers are doing all this on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, wow, surprise, 4 days to go in the season. Got an incredibly busy podcast. Pacers made a ton of moves, or are going to, I suppose, make a ton of moves on the end of their roster with some huge forward ramifications for long-term seasons or for future seasons. I just mixed up long-term and future while talking. That's okay. They're also waiving a player, apparently, in Keifer Sykes, and shifting around their roster with just 4 games left. Very fascinating timing here, and very interesting that the Pacers are doing this. I mean, it's all smart moves to me, and I'll break down why on today's show, but it's also interesting just giving the timing with only 4 days left in the season and 2 games left that the Pacers decide to do all this. So let's sum up the day and then break it up into parts. We get our first tweet this morning from Adrian Wojnarowski at about 10:30. The Pacers are converting two-way players, Duane Washington and Terry Taylor, to standard multi-year contracts per his sources. And then at 10:29, so 2 minutes after, Woj was at 10:27, Shams Charania says the Pacers are waiving guard Keifer Sykes. So let's parse this out. First, we'll go with why the Pacers are converting the two-way guys, why they waived Sykes, and at the end we'll say what is their situation now, what can they do now that they did all this stuff. So first and foremost, they had to waive Sykes to open roster spots because Justin Anderson's 10-day contract will expire by the time you're listening to this. It'll be on Thursday. They converted with their 2 roster spots from those 2 moves, Duane Washington and Terry Taylor to standard contracts. They were on 2-way deals before, but they're converting them to standard contracts. And the important word in Woj's tweet, and I'll find out more about this from some league sources in the future, but they're multi-year deals. And that is the key part of why the Pacers did this is the rules for 2-way contracts. This season, the Pacers could play them as much as they want. Duane Washington's been in the Pacers rotation for basically all of 22 outside of injuries. Terry Taylor's been in the Pacers rotation a bunch recently outside of a few games. He's even started the last couple, right? Those 2 guys are clearly good. They're young. They're talented players. Duane Washington's top 15 in scoring as a rookie at almost 10 per game. He's a great shooter. He can handle the ball in transition. He makes quick decisions. He's awesome in Rick Carlisle's system. Terry Taylor, top 5 in the NBA, not amongst guys his size, which is obviously a caveat with him sometimes. Top 5 in the NBA in offensive rebounding percentage. Amazing finisher around the rim. So patient, such a good roll man. Burlesque, powerful, but only 6'5". He's one of the most unique players I've ever seen, right? Those 2 guys are very good on 2-way contracts, and that's why the Pacers have been playing them so much and why they've been getting so much playing time. But 2-way contracts, and specifically the 2-way contracts of Duane Washington and Terry Taylor, expired when the season ended. So after this coming Sunday, they would have been free agents. And even on 2-way deals, it's very easy to give those guys a qualifying offer and have them back on the team next year because they'll be a restricted free agent if they get a qualifying offer. So the Pacers didn't run a risk of losing those guys, but they are better than 2-way contract players. They deserve a pay bump. They deserve to be a full roster player so that next year, when the 2-way rules go back to what they used to be, and they can only be with the team for a certain number of days, and their pay rate changes between the team and the playoffs are no longer a thing, and all this, and they can't be signed after a certain date, all this confusing stuff that to you, not a cap dork, doesn't matter, but to me is important, right? It's just better to have good players on standard deals, right? And that they deserve it. They're good enough to not be on 2-way deals, so the Pacers are giving them a multi-year deal, and that's the big concession here. Right? The Pacers would not have done this if they could not have gotten extra years on these deals because, like I just said, they could have made Washington and Terry Taylor restricted free agents this summer and just re-signed them then, but that would have only been a 1-year deal. So the fact that the Pacers can get these extra years on the contract is why it's important that the Pacers could do this, is now they have Duane Washington and Terry Taylor locked up, not only for the rest of this season, but also into next season. That's why they want, and maybe even beyond that. Again, it hasn't happened yet, so I haven't seen any deals or know anything to report to anybody, but I'm imagining they're at least 2 years. And something interesting is because the Pacers did not use all of their mid-level exception when they signed Torrey Craig, they can use the rest of that MLE on these guys to give them 3-year deals even. So they could have Duane Washington and Terry Taylor locked up with team options or non-guarantees, whatever bells seem important to the Pacers for several seasons, because they have that open MLE slot. And that is ultimately what I think we're going to see these deals shake out to be, is a pay bump for the rest of this season, a decent guarantee, a decent amount guaranteed, but not fully guaranteed next year, and then like a non-guaranteed or team option third year. That's usually how these shake out. Maybe they got a fourth year in there. I kind of doubt it, but that was what makes sense. Why the Pacers would do this is they get these guys under contract for more seasons to evaluate them, to develop them, because we've seen, as the Pacers season has gone, despite many sunken things that have not worked for them and injuries killing them, and they're awful. They're 25 and 55. These two rookies are good. They have a spot in the NBA. Maybe that's just a deep bench guy on a fully healthy team, but still, they have that level of value, and they're both young. Made all the sense in the world for the Pacers to convert their deal. So that is why they did this. They're both good players, and the Pacers would like to have good players under contract, and they can get that multi-year deal done. And that is the important part, because now they have, I'm assuming a little bit here, but the Pacers would not have done this without getting some sort of good contract out of this, because they can, they could have used restricted free agency on their side. They'll probably have team option years on the back or non-guarantee years, which means the Pacers have some flexibility and they have a talented young player under contract. And for these guys who would have had to either go through restricted free agency off of a two-way deal, this is a better offer than what they had. So the players get more money and a better contract. The Pacers get the good young players for more seasons. It's a win-win to convert these deals. So now the Pacers have two talented players locked up for future seasons. So that's why they would budge. The Pacers doing this now is likely baked in that fact that, okay, it's late enough in the season, the tax concerns are gone, they have enough of the MLE left that they can give a quality pay bump right now with no tax concerns, with no really other roster concerns. We'll talk about Keifer in the next segment, because this does kind of suck for him. But still get their guys locked up. And again, like I said earlier, kind of shorthand, they both really deserved it, right? Like Duane has been in the Pacers rotation for a long time now. He's going to play probably 48 games this season, almost 50 games as a rookie. Like that's almost as many as Duarte played. He could, if he has a strong closing weekend, get up to 10 points per game, 37% three-point shooter, right? And he's just really valuable off the dribble, and he can create a little bit with passing, right? His defense certainly leaves a lot to be desired, but that's why he's on a two-way deal right now. So he's a talented player. He totally deserves this. Terry Taylor, same thing, right? His finishing around the rim is over 75%. His rebounding is unbelievable. He's a great screen setter. His defense is solid for his size. Yes, he definitely has limitations because he's 6'5" and plays center and bangs on the inside sometimes, but both of these guys are good, right? And who knows what their role will be on the next iteration of the Pacers, but now the Pacers have them to find out. And even if they have perhaps non-guarantees next year, maybe they completely suck next year, the Pacers can maybe move on from them. It depends what their contract structure is. But at this stage of the season, the Pacers have all the leverage, right? Because in just 5 days, these conversions can't happen, and then the Pacers, or then Terry Taylor and Duane Washington would be stuck with, doing the restricted free agency dance. We saw what happened with Cassius Stanley last year, who did the two-way contract restricted free agency dance with the Pacers. He got offered the qualifying offer, sat on it for a little bit, and then it got pulled, and then he didn't remain with the Pacers going forward. He could have signed that at any time. So that is what those guys are up against, is being restricted free agents, and having the Pacers be able to match anything would not be as appealing as just getting a deal done now, getting long-term seasons, getting more money, and being with the team that, quite frankly, they fit very well with, right? And they're very popular young guys amongst their teammates as well. So it's really a no-brainer move to convert these guys. I've been talking about this for a while. I think I did my first show on why the Pacers could do this right after the trade deadline. And I thought it might even happen all the way back then, although the tax concerns were way more serious back then than they are now for the Pacers. Tristan Thompson's buyout is a big factor in allowing these moves to happen. I talked about it again in like mid-March before the Justin Anderson 10 days, because they had an open roster spot for a long time, and I thought maybe they could convert one of these two guys. But now that it's near the end of the season and it's kind of running out of time for these sort of moves to even happen, it made all the sense in the world for the Pacers to do this eventually. So, with this 3-day gap between a game and their closing weekend, and without having to lose really any flexibility, they have retained two talented young players for future seasons, and they barely lose much to do it. So smart moves from the Pacers. I thought they would do this at some point. So it just so happens they're doing it with 4 games to go. It means nothing for the encore product this year, right? Assuming the deals are signed Thursday morning, Terry Taylor and Duane Washington could could practice that day. The Pacers didn't practice Wednesday. They could practice Thursday, and then they could play in the weekend games the Pacers have to close out the seasons. And then they're also under contract this offseason and into next year, so they could work out at the facilities and all that stuff. So win-win to me. Those guys get their money that they would have had to fight for a little harder in restricted free agency, and the Pacers get young players under contract for a longer time. I'm looking forward to the details, but I would expect 3-year deals for both. We'll see what they start at and what the raises are in those. Let's talk about the other side of this. Keifer Sykes no longer on the Pacers, and Justin Anderson's an interesting case in this as well because his 10-day expires now. His time with the team could be done. We'll see where that all plays out. I'll break it all down why it ended up this way. Before we do that, though, let's talk about the good folks over at betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Master Championship odds, sports podcast, and sports reviews for all the different leagues this season, including the NBA. On Friday, they got Warriors-Lakers up on there with the Warriors favored by 12.5 points. With the Lakers not trying, they can't make the playoffs anymore. It seems like the Warriors, even without Steph, could win by more than that. It'll be fascinating. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and learn more about the trends and the action over at betonline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. I would highly recommend Locked On Now to hear the latest and greatest from our local experts around every single game that happened in the NBA last night, including the ones that affect the Pacers in the draft standings. So, what did the Pacers do to make this happen? Converting contracts from two ways to standard NBA contracts requires roster spots, and the Pacers are reportedly converting 2 players, right? So that means the Pacers needed 2 roster spots to get Duane Washington and Terry Taylor onto the standard NBA roster. And one of them was very easy to get. Justin Anderson was signed to his second 10-day deal with the Pacers on March 28th. That deal ran through April 6th, which was Wednesday. It is now Thursday, which means Justin Anderson is no longer technically on the Pacers roster. There's one roster spot. There's one conversion, nice and easy. The second one is not so easy. They had to figure out if they wanted to convert both guys, they had to waive someone. And look, I think there was only really 2 candidates. One is the guy they ultimately waived in Keifer Sykes, who wasn't in the rotation very much and was struggling. We'll get into more about Sykes in a second. The other is Ricky Rubio, who is a million miles overseas and is obviously not even really a member of the team, right? They're not going to cut Lance. They won his rights next year. Everybody else is either young or a veteran that has value to them, basically. To me. TJ Warren, same thing. They won his bird rights. Ricky Rubio, because of his price tag, they won his bird rights. I'll explain that in a minute too. So it was basically between Ricky Rubio and Keifer Sykes. And here's the pros and cons of both. Ricky Rubio has literally 0 present value, right? Like he's not playing. He's not even he might be in the continent now. He wasn't the last time Rick Carlisle talked about Ricky Rubio. And he might not ever play for the Pacers. But the pro of keeping Ricky Rubio is he has a very sizable salary, and the Pacers have his full bird rights because they acquired him in a trade, which means this summer the Pacers could sign and trade Ricky Rubio to another team and scoop up another asset, or they could use his salary in a trade as a fake salary in like a big sign and trade or something to bring back a different bad salary and get a bunch of assets. Who knows? They have ways they can use Ricky Rubio's salary this summer that could have value to them, or even keeping Ricky Rubio for a year just to have his bird rights next summer to do the same thing. I don't know what they're thinking, and his ACL tear makes this complicated, but there are ways to use Ricky Rubio as an asset this summer that are interesting. Keifer Sykes does have present value. He's played for the Pacers this season, obviously, as a rookie, and has had some good games, especially recently, right? He played very good defense against Trae Young just about a week ago and was 4 for 6 against Denver the next 2 nights later, right? 10 points and 16 points in those 2 games respectively. But after this season, he had a team option next year, and that's it. Right? So technically, this was the last guaranteed season of Sykes' deal. So his present value could have been just the next 2 games. And here's where I think the rubber meets the road. The next 2 games of Sykes, he might not even have played. He hasn't even been in the Pacers rotation in the last 2 games. He didn't play against Detroit. He didn't play against Philly. And TJ McConnell just returned. So now there's even less minutes for him at point guard. So there wasn't really a lot of value in keeping Keifer Sykes around. And his contract's fully guaranteed for the season. He loses no money by being waived. So the pros of Ricky Rubio long-term, because they're able to sign and trade him this summer, I think are higher than the pros of Keifer Sykes long-term for the Pacers. And that's why they ultimately decided, well, at least, it's been reported by Shams. It hasn't happened yet. As I'm recording, as you're listening, maybe it has happened, whatever. that Keifer Sykes will be waived to open the second roster spot for the Pacers. And that is how they're going to be able to do this. And Sykes, look, let's talk about his season, because it's kind of strange, right? They brought him in on December 28th. And at that time, Brad Wanamaker had been starting and was doing a terrible job. And Karis LeVert was in COVID protocols, and Brogdon was in COVID protocols, and McConnell had his broken wrist. They had nothing at point guard. And Keifer Sykes came in and was really good in the first 10 days he was with the team. He had the 10-point game against the Cavs in his first start, and then 22 points in his next game in the Garden in New York with 6 assists, 18 points the game after that, and he earns his contract, right? He was good in those games. Pacers lost all of them because they were playing the weirdest lineups in those COVID spans, but he played well. And then after his contract got guaranteed, Keifer Sykes has played 27 games since January 8th. In those 27 games, he has shot above 40% 5 times. 5 times. He went 1 for 1 against Boston, and that's one of them. Above 40%. I just read a 40%, almost said it. He went 2 for 2 against Memphis, and then a 3 for 6 game against the Spurs, a 6 for 9 game against the Hawks, and a 4 for 6 game against the Nuggets. Those are his only 5 of his 27 appearances where he shot over 40%. So Keifer Sykes, great story, had a great run of play right when he was signed. That the Pacers needed him to do that, and he was a capable depth point guard. But his shot escaped him, and he became kind of a stopgap defensive guy. And they don't need that for the last 2 games this season. They don't necessarily care about wins and losses. They'd rather make moves that have more future value, and Terry Taylor and Duane Washington have more future value. And that's why, to me, they ultimately moved on from Sykes, even though it wouldn't have, it's not like if they had cut Rubio and kept Sykes, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Maybe Sykes was in camp next year because he has a team option, but that is why they did this. They determined that, to me at least, the decision was they'd rather keep Ricky Rubio than Sykes long term, and they needed another way to get a roster spot to get these guys in the door. So they determined 2 things. If they were ranking values, they said, we want both two-way guys to be converted, and we think Ricky Rubio future value this offseason is higher than Keifer Sykes. So that's why Keifer Sykes got waived. That was a lot of words. The other factor in this, Justin Anderson, his contract is expired, but that doesn't mean the Pacers can't sign him for the rest of the season, actually. The Portland Trailblazers have done this. They have signed a couple players to hardship exception contracts. What a hardship deal is at this stage of the season is if you have 4 guys who have missed 3 or more games and will continue to be out for your team, you can appeal the league for a hardship exception and get that's what hardship used to mean before all the COVID rules changed everything. And Portland has a bunch of these. They have Chris Dunn on a hardship deal and Drew Eubanks on a hardship deal. A different team just signed somebody to a hardship contract as well. I'm having trouble remembering who it was. But the Pacers, between Brogdon and Rubio and Turner and Warren, and Duarte are in fact eligible if they wanted to for a hardship deal. So because Justin Anderson's contract just expired, there's no waiver period. They could, in theory, sign him to a hardship deal for the rest of the season. Hardship rules are a little confusing. I might have something wrong there. I don't think so, though, and I believe the Pacers are able to, if they wanted, bring back Justin Anderson for the rest of the season. Now with Keifer, because he'll be waived, and Justin Anderson is not, his contract just ends. Keifer would be waived and would clear waivers on Saturday. The Pacers play at 1 on Saturday, and he would clear waivers at 5. So it's very unlikely that they could even bring him back on a hardship deal. It'd just be for the last day of the season. I'm not even sure you can sign a guy for 1 day on a hardship deal. I think it has to be a little more than that. So Keifer Sykes probably can't be brought back in the same way Justin Anderson can, but it would not surprise me if the Pacers, if we found out later that after all this happened and they convert those 2 guys, that Justin Anderson still gets brought back to the Pacers for their last couple of games. It doesn't necessarily matter. He barely played in their last game. They've been playing Lance at the 3, and now that they have Taylor and Washington locked up, maybe they don't need to. And maybe they decide someone else should be getting his minutes, and I'll talk about other guys. They could sign two-way guys now, right? There are a lot of minutes to go around this weekend. So maybe they decide they don't want Justin Anderson around. But it never hurts to have bodies in practice, and it's not like that money would cripple them from a tax perspective or anything. So it doesn't really hurt them to bring him back for the last 4 days of the season, and he seems to be fitting in well with their culture and what they're doing. He hasn't played particularly well. To be fair to Keifer, who I just said, part of the reason they're waiving him, he hasn't played well. Justin Anderson has also really not played that well. I mean, his defense is very strong. He's a capable mover, but his shot has been really ugly. I mean, on his most recent 10-day, Anderson just shot 35% on 7 shots per game, right? That's pretty poor. But for a tanking team, not the end of the world. So the reason they waived Keifer Sykes, to sum up what I just said, the reason they waived Keifer Sykes is so that they could convert the 2 ways. And the reason they they waived Keifer Sykes instead of Ricky Rubio is because Rubio could have some sign and trade value this summer. Now they have their two-way guys locked up for multi-year deals, which has future value, and Keifer Sykes had little future value, probably no future with the Pacers beyond the season. And then Justin Anderson opened the other roster spot because his 10-day expired, but he could still, in theory, be brought back on a hardship deal for the rest of the season. No idea if the Pacers are going to do that. I just think it is a possibility that they end up doing that because it is legal. Why not? So, what now? The Pacers team looks totally different this weekend. Well, not really. They have the same guys minus Keifer Sykes as of right now, minus Keifer Sykes and Justin Anderson as of right now. But their team could even look different this weekend. What can they do? Why would they even do it at this point in the season? What's the point of signing a guy with 4 days left in the season? We'll talk about that coming right up. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Check out Locked On NBA for your second one to hear about all the games around the NBA last night, including the ones that affected the Pacers in the inverse standings. So now what? The Pacers, by doing this, have their 15-man roster filled out, right? Sykes out, Anderson out, Taylor in, and Washington in. But you have 17 slots as a team. You have two-way slots on top of your roster spots. And by converting both two-way slots, the Pacers now have 2 open two-way spots with no one occupying them. So this is a little interesting timing because something I was thinking, and I mentioned this rule a couple weeks ago on a podcast, but there is a rule that if a player on a two-way deal has to be active on a team's active list for 15 days during a season to be able to be made a restricted free agent in the coming year. So I thought that it was possible a guy like Nate Hinton, who played with the Pacers for 10 days earlier this season on a hardship deal, could be signed on April 6th to a two-way deal to backfill one of those spots, and then he would get 5 days, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th, the last day of the season, to get to 15 days on a two-way deal. So I thought maybe the Pacers would make these moves yesterday just to do that. They did not because they needed Anderson's deal to expire. They get they get it one cheaper day of signing their two-way guy. The semantics don't matter. They did not do that. It's not like that restricted free agency has a ton of value. But I thought that timing could matter. But the fact that it didn't kind of means maybe the Pacers just don't sign anyone with these two-way slots. They are kind of low value with only 4 days left in the season and 2 games, right? Here's where they could have value, though. If you'll recall, right, Edmund Sumner, for example, he signed a 2-year two-way deal with the Pacers. He was injured when he did it, and the first year was a rehab year, and the second year was a serious two-way, but he got a 2-year two-way deal. Another guy who the Pacers had on a two-way contract was Amita Brima last year, if you recall. They had injuries to every center on the team, and they needed any tall person to play the center for them, and Amita Brima got a two-way deal for them, ended up being in the rotation for a few games, and he got a 2-year two-way deal, right? He was set to be on, I think, the Summer League team, but then ended up getting waived and not being there. But he also got a 2-year two-way deal. That is legal. You can sign a guy to a two-way contract that is longer than one season. So that is what the Pacers could, in theory, do with their open two-way slots with only 4 days left is, hey, you're not going to be a restricted free agent this year. We'll actually get you under contract next year. If whoever they bring on a two-way. That could be the way that they entice a free agent to actually sign a two-way deal with them is beyond getting the 4 days this year. Perhaps they're on the team next year. And the Pacers can cut a two-way guy anytime. There's very little penalty in doing that, really. So it's not like a big commitment from them. And for the player, they'd kind of be getting strung along. But if they get an opportunity these last 2 days on a tanking team where there could be minutes, and maybe that's appealing to a young player looking to break into the NBA, especially if it's a 2-year deal, because then that could potentially get them into a training camp next year with the Pacers, right? Amita Brima, that did not happen for him. He ended up getting cut, but that is a possibility. So that is what the Pacers could do with these two-way slots. To me, is they could sign a guy to a 2-year two-way deal. So who are the options? Well, I'll get to that in a second, but I want to actually add one more point into why this could be appealing. Look, the Pacers' 2 games this weekend, maybe they play the rotation they've been playing. That features Buddy Hield and Lance Stevenson and TJ McConnell and some older guys is what I'm getting at, right? They just played the 76ers, and they did play a healthy combo of old and young guys. But they have enough, not a lot, enough healthy bodies now that they could do what they usually do for their last game. And this has been a Pacers thing for a while. Not as much last year because they were fighting for play-in seeding. But under McMillan, almost every year, their last game of the season was just they shut down all the vets and just young guys went crazy. And it's possible if the Pacers lose to the Nets Saturday, they'll have locked up at whatever they can, 5th in the lottery odds. So there's no risk of doing anything in their last game. They could just shut down Buddy Hield for that game and shut down TJ McConnell and Lance Stevenson and Justin Anderson, just say young guys galore. And then if you're a new two-way guy for the Pacers, who they signed with 4 days left in the season, you could, in theory, get some minutes and get your NBA debut that game. So again, they have ways of enticing guys to sign these two-way deals, even though they're very low value slots on the Pacers roster and for technically or potentially the player signing. Who could some candidates be? I don't really know. I mentioned Nate Hinton earlier because I thought there's a chance they could try to do this to have him be a restricted free agent. I'd still consider him, in theory, a candidate. I mean, he was one of the best Mad Ants this year, one of only a few guys to play in over 30 games for them this season. And he probably would have led that team in games played if he didn't get his hardship COVID call up and he spent some time with the Pacers. He played for Carlisle on a two-way deal his rookie year, played fine for the Pacers in preseason and on that hardship deal. He's not like an awesome player, but he's a heady defender, decent athlete, right? Maybe they want to bring him in on a two-way deal. Maybe they want to bring him in on a 2-year two-way deal. Who knows what he wants, right? Gabe York was also very solid for the Manics this year. Another guy who played over 30 games, 22 points per game for him on the G League level. He had some banana scoring games. He's not the most efficient scorer necessarily, but he can really get to the rim, and he's a decent passer as well. Those two names are the two Mad Ants that stand out the most to me, and that's usually where these two-way guys at this point in the season especially get drawn from, especially because the Mad Ants season is over, right? The G League playoffs are still gone, but the Mad Ants did not make it barely. They had their best players got called up to the Pacers all season long. It was hard for them to field a team like Walt Lemon. He played for the Pacers in preseason one year. Perhaps could be a candidate to be called up. They liked Benny Boatwright in summer league before he got hurt. He got hurt for the Mad Ants as well. But like there are options. Darius Adams is another one who were solid for Fort Wayne this year. But I think that Hinton and Gabe York are the two that stand out the most to me as could be call-ups. Jordan Bell was very good for the Mad Ants, but he's not eligible for a two-way deal. So those are the guys that make the most sense to potentially, if the Pacers are going to just sign a new player for the last 4 days of the season, get those spots. And even like Keelan Martin is a guy who's eligible for this because he signed with the Celtics, a different team. He's now eligible to ink a deal with the Pacers on a two-way. Actually, he made too much. Keelan Martin is not eligible. Please ignore that. Keelan Martin, not eligible to sign with the Pacers. I don't know why I typed his name in my notes. There's a million guys that could make some sense. Remember, they had Ahmad Keifer, on that hardship deal earlier this year. Maybe they look there. All those guys could in theory be options. Reggie Perry now is back with Portland, so he's actually not an option. But the Pacers could have a number of options. Like by picking the Mad Ants, like I typed Keelan just thinking of guys who are on the Pacers this year. They can't actually do that. Don't get that out of your head. But they could sign anybody. It could literally be anybody, right? So it's hard to actually pick someone. But though, like Justin Anderson made sense because he was the best player on Fort Wayne. That's something the Pacers usually do. But mid-season two-way signings are kind of hard to predict, especially when the season in the G League is over. So it could literally be anybody. I think Hinton and York make the most sense, or would be like the betting favorites if that existed. But here's the other thing: because there's not a ton of value from these spots at this point in the season. Maybe they just don't sign anybody. They don't have to pay anyone for those 4 days. It's not like they're going to play or be like a factor for your team. And if they're at the point where they'd be taking a two-way with 4 days left in the season, they'll probably be able to be signed in the offseason anyway. So there's a chance they sign nobody. I mean, it's better to use your asset spot and sign someone than not, right? Maximizing your roster spots is good. So I would anticipate that they would prefer to sign someone, I suppose, but it's not like a big deal if they don't. So to me, the rankings here would be the best thing they could do, and what they would probably like to do is a 2-year two-way deal, but players and agents don't love getting those. The second thing they would like to do is get someone at all who could maybe play or just be a healthy body in practice. And then after that, just not even use it. That's probably the order of what they would prefer. And maybe that's a Mad Ant like hit in New York. Like I said, maybe it's someone we don't see coming or that the Pacers have long been fond of but couldn't get on the team. Who knows? Who knows what they're thinking, but we will certainly see. I can't believe I said an illegal transaction in Keelan Martin there. That's really bugging me here. But that is the Pacers' options with their new open spots. We'll see. Perhaps they have already figured out who those players will be, and they just haven't been reported as the other signings have. But very chaotic day for the Pacers. Duane Washington promoted. Terry Taylor promoted. Keifer Sykes waived. Justin Anderson's 10-day expires. That's a lot of moves for a team with 4 days left in the season who's 25 and 55. But I hope I made it all make sense today. And tomorrow, if they sign some two-way guys, I'll break down what that means, what it could mean over the weekend, and more tomorrow. We'll also talk about what's at stake for the Pacers this weekend. Can they get to top 5 in lotto odds? How are the Cavs going to do in their pursuit of getting in the 7-8 play-in game? How are the Rockets going to do in the Pacers' pursuit to get the best pick in second round? All that stuff and more we'll talk about tomorrow on Locked On Pacers. Hope everybody has a great week, and we will see you then.